What's going on, guys? Week 2 is in the books. I'm back with another edition of Buy or Sell. Going to go through 10 players I'm buying or selling. I'm also going to recap how my takes on the Sunday morning live stream went. Before I dive into it, though, guys, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Really do appreciate the support. Let's dive right into it. So, of course, I'm not going to recap the entire 4-hour Sunday morning live stream, but I do want to go through some of the best takes, worst takes from that live, making sure I'm learning, getting better for every Sunday morning live to come. Mess. And I'm actually very in on Trey Lance today. I think the heat for Trey Lance is honestly really shocking. Man, this put a really big damper on my week. Probably the worst take of the week. Obviously, eating the L with the Trey Lance injury. Looked really bad. Really hope he recovers. But yeah, big L if you started Trey Lance this week like I did in almost every single DraftKings lineup. It's the Jimmy G show now, though, and that's probably a good thing for Deebo Samuel. It's probably a good thing for George Kittle, and I don't think it's a very good thing for Brandon Ayuka, the bazooka. Even if he plays, he might not be 100%, so I'm out on Julio Jones. Tony Pollard, I'm taking a big L on Pollard. I have him in way too many leagues, and he is not going to be a guy I can trust this week. So I'm starting Ramondre Stevenson over him in some spots because Tony Pollard has a horrible offensive line. Zeke is still going to get a huge portion of that backfield. And we didn't see enough receiving out of him in week 1 to have any sort of confidence in him, even in PPR leagues. Tony Pollard doesn't seem to be an L all of a sudden. 43 rushing yards and 55 receiving yards. Guys, there's a real chance Tony Pollard outscores Zeke in fantasy football this year. That's why I was drafting him on so many teams. And it's really encouraging to see this in a game with Cooper Rush starting, with the offensive line pretty banged up. I think Tony Pollard's really in must consideration in your flex moving forward. I think I'm going to take back eating the L on Tony Pollard. Usually we do see guys play through ankle injuries, so I might be jumping the gun a tiny bit saying you have to bench him. You don't have to bench DeAndre Swift, but I think you should at least consider other options with DeAndre Swift this week. He does have an ankle injury. I don't dislike DeAndre Swift. A fully healthy DeAndre Swift, guys, is a top 5 maybe running back in fantasy football. He's not fully healthy. So I'm a little bit nervous about it. That's all. I was on the money here. I was pretty nervous as the stream went on because DeAndre Swift was probably the most dangerous name I had. Only 7 touches for DeAndre Swift compared to 13 touches for Jamal Williams this week. Clearly the ankle injury played a role, but it seems like he escaped without any setbacks. So we're starting DeAndre Swift every single week moving forward, and I'm not very concerned about him for the rest of the season. Why not Duvernay? So I knew I was going to get a lot of Devin Duvernay questions this week because I've already been seeing them in the comments all week. He's probably the number 2 receiver for the Ravens. But guess what? The Ravens tried out 2 or 3 tight ends at a higher rate than everyone else in the league. They want to be extremely run heavy. And Rashad Bateman's the clear top receiver alongside Mark Andrews. Devin Duvernay had 4 targets in week 1, and he could easily see less than that in week 2. Devin Duvernay, opening play of the game after me trashing on him the entire live stream, returns over 100-yard return touchdown off the kickoff. But guys, he only finished with 2 targets, 2 catches. He did still have 42 yards, but we're not starting Devin Duvernay. I'm very in on Bateman this week. Actually, I'm glad you brought up Bateman because he's actually my favorite player prop of the day is Rashad Bateman over 45.5 receiving yards. I think people are sleeping still on Rashad Bateman. He had the 12th most air yards in the NFL in week 1, in his prop line's only 45.5. The Dolphins against a Ravens secondary that's going to be without their top 4 corners. I think Rashad Bateman could easily go over 100 yards again. He might see a slightly fewer targets than some of these other top receivers across the league alongside Mark Andrews as well. But he also is seeing extremely deep targets. Like the targets he's getting are very valuable. He was 21.6 yards down the field on average in each of his targets in week 1. That's super, super encouraging. I don't think it's going to stay quite that high, but it still outlines just how valuable the targets Rashad Bateman are getting. They're really valuable. I think his prop line should be in the 60s. We were on the money here. I think I keep going for a little while, but we were on the money here, guys, with Rashad Bateman, 4 catches, 108 yards, and a touchdown. And we were on the money with this game. Hopefully you stacked this game in DFS. I actually did have one lineup with Tua, Waddle, and Tyreek. It absolutely saved my DFS day where I played Trey Lance in 95% of my lineups, but Rashad Bateman over 45.5. I mean, they were giving away free money with this prop line. Absolutely crushed. I think he had a catch over 45.5 yards, averages 27 yards a catch, though, in week 2. Moving on to week 3 with Bateman, feeling really good about him and his role still moving forward. Paris Campbell startable with Colts receivers out? Yeah, he is startable. He's not startable in all situations. He had the 3rd most slot snaps in the league, 47 snaps out of the slot for Paris Campbell. He's probably going to run that back. in week 2 without Michael Pittman, without Alec Pierce. So yeah, I do like Paris Campbell as a deeper wide receiver play. I don't think he's a top 30 wide receiver still, though. 0 points for Paris Campbell in week 2. There's a lot of athletic players in the NFL. We've never seen it from Paris Campbell. And when you really think about it, he's never had very good competition. Last season, he did play some games and he was alongside the corpse of T.Y. Hilton. Pittman was obviously still there. I think I was wrong, guys, about Paris Campbell, and I'm ready to eat the L on all my best ball squads. Honestly, I think Ashton Doolin looks better than him. And I think when Alec Pierce comes back, he's probably going to play ahead of him too. And obviously, Michael Pittman is the alpha, number 1 receiver in this offense. So taking the L with Paris Campbell, I think he should be on the waiver wire. Never mind in your starting lineups. Yeah, so these two guys, I think, Chase, in basically all situations, I don't think there's a question yet where I've told anyone not to start these guys. Among Us, St. Brown has to be started. Guys, if he gets another 8 catches today, he's going to be tied for the longest streak ever of 8 catches in a row. It's going to be him, Antonio Brown, Michael Thomas. Him, prime Michael Thomas, prime Antonio Brown, and Among Us, St. Brown. They are tied for the record of most games in a row with at least 8 catches. Guys, Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's a top 10 fantasy football wide receiver. He is the real deal. You don't do what he did as a rookie and not be good. So even when Jameson Williams returns, and I think Jameson Williams is going to be really good down the stretch late in the season, Amon-Ra St. Brown still could be a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy football. If you got him, hold on to him, man, because we're riding Amon-Ra St. Brown straight to fantasy football championships. There's the recap of some of the takes on the live. Honestly, a lot of really good takes on the Sunday morning live, a lot to learn from as well. We're not going to overrate Paris Campbell heading into next week. We probably won't be 95% on DraftKings on any one quarterback. Again, heading into this week, definitely lesson learned there with Trey Lance. I do like to take risks, but the potential risk there is just too much. All right, we're going to get into the buys and sells, starting with number 1. We're still buying Kyle Pitts, guys. He was my most drafted player in best ball. I put over 4K on the line in best ball. I did over 500 best ball drafts this season. You do the math, guys. I have Kyle Pitts on over 200 best ball teams. But guys, you can't sell low on Kyle Pitts. He still does have top 3 weekly upside. He still has the same resume that we wanted when we bought him. When you look at the tight end landscape, it's such a desolate wasteland of just nothingness. It's almost every single tight end has a floor of 0 points. Kyle Pitts is one of these few tight ends. He does have top 3 tight end upside every single week. And I think we're going to see it sooner rather than later. Obviously, it's about as bad of a start we could have for Kyle Pitts, but I'm still buying Kyle Pitts. I'm not willing to take the L yet on Kyle Pitts. I'm giving it at least another couple of weeks. I am selling Antonio Gibson. I'm definitely selling him heading into week 3 because, first of all, J.D. McKissic is very much involved. This is one of the other reasons to be concerned about Antonio Gibson this season. J.D. McKissic, he only had 3 carries this past week, but he got the bulk of the pass catching work. 7 catches, 54 yards for J.D. McKissic. But then when Brian Robinson returns, maybe in week 5, as soon as week 5, Brian Robinson could be back and fully healthy. But when he does return, Antonio Gibson, he's going to be really tough to trust in fantasy. He's not going to have a receiving role, and he could lose the goal line work and some of the early down work to Brian Robinson. So I'm definitely selling high right now on Antonio Gibson. Number 3, we are buying Brandon Cooks. Shout out to the WalterPicks app, by the way, who was extremely high. The app was extremely high. Walter was very high on Brandon Cooks all offseason. Probably going to have more games with 10 targets than without. So I'm buying Brandon Cooks. Number 4, another guy that was on this list last week, by A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon sees another 20 touches this week. There's huge days ahead for A.J. Dillon, and the floor looks pretty encouraging too. A 20-touch performance is definitely a pretty strong floor. The window to buy is going to close very soon. You're one big A.J. Dillon game away from no longer being able to buy A.J. Dillon in fantasy football, so I'm continuing to buy A.J. Dillon. I'm buying George Kittle, especially if someone with George Kittle in my league has lost their first 2 games. Guys, I can just tell by the number of texts I'm getting every morning, people complaining about George Kittle in the comments, people complaining about George Kittle in the comments on the live stream. George Kittle owner, they're frustrated if they are in your league. And this is the perfect time to send a trade offer because, again, tight end, desolate wasteland. There's probably only 3 or 4 tight ends in fantasy that don't have a 0-point floor. George Kittle is one of those guys when he is healthy. Plus, I like that Jimmy G is the starting quarterback for the rest of the season. So I'm buying George Kittle if I need a tight end, which is likely, unless I have Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Dalton Schultz dealing with an injury now. And yeah, if you have Cole Kmet, I'm talking to you. Go get George Kittle. Number 6, I am buying Ramondre Stevenson. He's had a slightly underwhelming start to the fantasy season. I do think he has an interesting ceiling, though the floor is admittedly a little low, sharing the backfield with Damian Harris, who's probably going to continue to get the goal line carry. So I'm not going to give too much up for Ramondre, but if you're in really, really desperate need of a second running back or a flex option or even depth at the running back position, I do like betting on the talent of Ramondre Stevenson. Number 7, buy Chris Olave. Guys, it's only a matter of time till you're just not going to be able to get Chris Olave. Chris Olave broke air yards in week 2. And if you've been following me for any amount of time, you know I love looking at air yards. I think air yard is the best volume metric. It's the best metric to assess how much volume a receiver is getting, because it doesn't just account for they got X amount of targets. It accounts also for the depth of the targets. And that is important to account for because deeper targets are more valuable. It was more air yards, for context, than any player had in any game all of last season. Chris Olave brings something to the Saints offense that Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry do not bring. I think he's going to be a wide receiver 2 at least in fantasy this season, and he has weekly wide receiver 1 upside. So I'm willing to sell a decent amount to get Chris Olave on my teams, especially if you're in a league with bonuses for big plays, 40+ yard plays. Chris Olave is going to be money in those leagues this season. Number 8 is sell Alvin Kamara. And this is specifically for teams that are 0-2. I think if you're 0-2, you really strongly need to consider selling Alvin Kamara. There's a pretty good chance you're 0-2 if you drafted Alvin Kamara. And if that's the case, I think you got to sell low. I think you got to get at least an RB2 or wide receiver 2, ideally an RB1 or wide receiver 1. And there is a good chance he doesn't play in week 3. That's still unknown. I'm recording this Tuesday morning. But if he doesn't play, I would monitor this closer to Sunday. If we know he's not playing, trade him to someone that's 2-0. Sell low on Alvin Kamara because you can't afford to go 0-3 in fantasy football. We got to avoid, at a minimum, those last place punishments. Number 9 is buy Michael Gallup. I've been talking about Michael Gallup all offseason. I'm so excited for him to come back. And Noah Brown looked pretty good in week 2. But guys, Michael Gallup could be active as soon as this week, as soon as week 3. I think the window to get Michael Gallup is closing. And he's still available for free on some waiver wires. So definitely go add him. Don't trade too much for Michael Gallup. But I still think he has an intriguing ceiling. Nobody's really thinking about Michael Gallup heading into week 3. So I'm buying Michael Gallup. Number 10 is another rookie wide receiver. I am buying Garrett Wilson. And I'm not going to lie. Garrett Wilson was my prospect model's favorite rookie wide receiver. He checked every single box as a prospect. I went into the season believing Elijah Moore was going to lead this team in receiving. But listen to these stats 2 weeks into the season. Elijah Moore, 12 targets, 11.6% target share, 52 yards, no touchdowns. Garrett Wilson, 22 targets, 22.4% target share, 154 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, it's night and day. It's been Joe Flacco, so there's a little bit of concern that maybe when Zach Wilson comes back, he'll go back to his guy, Elijah Moore. But you don't command these targets as a rookie without being very, very good. I'm buying Garrett Wilson. And guys, one of these guys, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Drake London, even Treylon Burks, even Jameson Williams, when he comes back, maybe even Jahan Dotson, but probably not. I don't think he's in the same tier. Like, so one of these guys could be this year's Jamar Chase. They're not going to be as good as Jamar Chase, obviously, but in terms of winning fantasy football leagues, you want Garrett Wilson, you want Chris Olave, and even Drake London too. Those are the 10 players I'm buying or selling heading into week 3. A lot of buys on the list this week, focusing on the buys rather than the sells, but there will be sells on this show for sure. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Time is the most valuable thing we have, so thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I will be back next week recapping the live from Sunday morning and going into 10 more buys and sells. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a good one.